Okay, I'm reading out of the Code of Federal Regulations, Truth in Lending Act, Section 1026.8, identifying transactions on periodic statements. Within Subpart B, about open-end credit, the creditor shall identify credit transactions on or with the first periodic statement that reflects the transaction by furnishing the following information as applicable. A. Sale credit. 1. Except as provided in paragraph A2 of this section, for each credit transaction involving the sale of property or services, a creditor must disclose the amount and date of the transaction and either I, Roman numeral I, a brief identification of the property or services purchased for creditors and sellers that are the same or related, or Roman numeral II, the seller's name and the city and state or foreign country where the transaction took place. The creditor may omit the address or provide any suitable designation that helps the consumer to identify the transaction when the transaction took place at a location that is not fixed, took place in the consumer's home, or was a mail, internet, or telephone order. A2. Creditors need not comply with paragraph A1 of this section if the actual copy of the receipt or other credit document is provided with the first periodic statement reflecting the transaction and the amount of the transaction and either the date of the transaction to the consumer's account or the date of indebting the transaction are disclosed on the copy or on the periodic statement. B. Non-sale credit. For each credit transaction not involving the sale of property or services, a creditor must disclose a brief identification of the transaction, the amount of the transaction, and at least one of the following dates: the date of the transaction, the date the transaction was debited to the consumer's account, or if the consumer signed a credit document, the date appearing on the document. If an actual copy of the receipt or other credit document is provided and that copy shows the amount of at least one of the specified dates, the brief identification may be omitted. C. Alternative creditor procedures. Consumer inquiries for clarification or documentation. The following procedures apply to creditors that treat an inquiry for clarification or documentation as a notice of a billing error, including correcting the amount in accordance with 1026.13e. 1. Failure to disclose the information required by paragraphs A and B of the section is not a failure to comply with the regulation, provided that the creditor also maintains procedures reasonably designed to obtain and provide information. This applies to transactions that take place outside a state as defined in 1020 in the definition sections, whether or not the creditor maintains procedures reasonably adapted to obtain the required information. 2. As an alternative to the brief identification of sale or non-sale credit, creditor may disclose a number or symbol that also appears on the receipt or other credit document given to the consumer if the consumer or symbol reasonably identifies the transaction with that creditor. 1026.9 Subsequent disclosure requirements. A. Furnishing statement of billing rights. Annual statement, number 1, under A. Furnishing statement of billing rights, annual statement. The creditor shall mail or deliver the billing rights statement required by 1026.6 A5 and B5.3, Roman numeral 3, at least once per calendar year, at intervals of not less than 6 months nor more than 18 months, either to all consumers or to each consumer entitled to receive a periodic statement under Part 5, B2, for any one billing cycle. A. Furnishing statement of billing rights. Number 2, alternative summary statement. As an alternative to paragraph A1 of this section, the creditor may mail or deliver on or with each periodic statement a statement substantially similar to Model Form G4 or Model Form G4A in Appendix G to this part as applicable. Creditors offering home equity plans subject to requirements of 1026.40 may use either model form at their option. B. Under Part 9, 1026.9, disclosures for supplemental credit access devices and additional features. Number 1. If a creditor within 30 days after mailing or delivering the account opening disclosures under 1026.6A1 or B32A as applicable adds a credit feature to the consumer's account or mails or delivers to the consumer a credit access device, including but not limited to checks that access a credit card for which the finance charge terms are the same as those previously disclosed, no additional disclosures are necessary. except as provided in paragraph B3 of this section. After 30 days, if the creditor adds a credit feature or furnishes a credit access device other than as a renewal, resupply, or the original issuance of a credit card on the same finance charge terms, the creditor shall disclose before the consumer uses the feature or device for the first time that it is for use in obtaining credit under the terms previously disclosed. 2. Except as provided in paragraph B3 of this section, whenever a credit feature is added or a credit access device is mailed or delivered to the consumer and the finance charge terms for the feature or device differ from disclosures previously given, the disclosures required by 1026.6A1 or B3-2A as applicable that are applicable to the added feature or device shall be given before the consumer uses the feature or device for the first time. 3. Checks that access a credit card account. Disclosures. For open-end plans not subject to the requirements of 1026.40, if checks that can be used to access a credit card account are provided more than 30 days after account opening, disclosures under 1026.6b are mailed or delivered, or are provided within 30 days of the account opening disclosures and the finance charge terms, the checks differ from the finance charge terms previously disclosed, the creditor shall disclose on the front of the page containing the checks the following terms in the form of a table with the headings, content, and form substantially similar to sample G19 and Appendix G to this part. If a promotional rate, as that term defined in 1026.16 G2I, applies to the checks, and 1. The promotional rate and time period during which the promotional rate will remain in effect, and 2. The type of rate that will apply, such as whether the purchase or cash advance rate applies after the promotional rate expires, and the annual percentage rate that will apply after the promotional rate expires. For a variable rate account, a creditor must disclose an annual percentage rate based on the applicable index or formula in accordance with the accuracy requirements set forth in paragraph B3-2 of this section. And 3. The date, if any, by which the consumer must use the checks in order to qualify for the promotional rate. If the creditor will honor checks used after such date will apply an annual percentage rate other than the promotional rate, the creditor must disclose this fact and the type of annual percentage rate that will apply if the consumer uses the checks after such date. If no promotional rate applies to the checks, 1. The type of rate that will apply to the checks and the applicable annual percentage rate. For a variable rate account, a creditor must disclose an annual percentage rate based on the applicable index or formula in accordance with the accuracy requirements set forth in paragraph B3-2 of this section. No promotional rate exists. Applies to checks. 2 is reserved. C. Any transaction fees to the checks disclosed under 1026.6 B24, and D. Whether or not a grace period is given within which any credit extended by use of the checks may be repaid without incurring a finance charge due to a periodic interest rate. When disclosing whether there is a grace period, the phrase "how to avoid paying interest on check transactions" shall be used as the row heading when a grace period applies to credit extended by the use of the checks. When disclosing the fact that no grace period exists for credit extended by use of the checks, the phrase "paying interest" shall not be used as the row heading. Roman numeral 2, accuracy. The disclosures in paragraph B3I of this section must be accurate as of the time the disclosures are mailed or delivered. A variable APR is accurate if it was in effect within 60 days of when the disclosures are mailed or delivered. Variable rates, Roman numeral 3, if any APR required to be disclosed pursuant to paragraph B3I of this section is a variable rate, the card issuer shall also disclose the fact that the rate may vary and how the rate is determined, describing how the applicable rate will be determined. The card issuer must identify the type of index or formula that is used in setting the rate. The value of the index and the amount of the margin that are used to calculate the variable rate shall not be disclosed in the table. A disclosure of any applicable limitations on rate increases shall not be included in the table. C. Change in terms. Number 1. Rules affecting home equity plans. Roman numeral I. Written notice required. For home equity plans subject to the requirements of 1026.40, whenever any term required to be disclosed under 1026.6a is changed or the required minimum periodic payment is increased, the creditor shall mail or deliver written notice of the change to the consumer who may be affected. The notice shall be mailed or delivered at least 15 days prior to the effective date of the change. The 15-day timing requirement does not apply if the change has been agreed to by the consumer. The notice shall be given, however, before the effective date of the change. Notice not required, Roman numeral 2. For home equity plans subject to requirements of 102640, a creditor is not required to provide notice under this section when the change involves a reduction of any component of a finance charge or other charge, or when the change results from an agreement involving a court proceeding. Roman numeral 3, notice to restrict credit. For home equity plans subject to the requirements of 102640, if the creditor prohibits additional extensions of credit or reduces the credit limit pursuant to 102640 F3, Roman numeral I, or Roman numeral 4, the creditor shall mail or deliver written notice of the action to each consumer who will be affected. The notice must be provided not later than 3 business days after the action is taken and shall contain specific reasons for the action. The creditor requires the consumer to request reinstatement of credit privileges. The notice also shall state that fact. 2. Rules affecting open and non-home secured plans. Roman numeral I. Changes where written advance notice is required. A. General. For plans other than home equity plans subject to the requirements of 102640, except as provided in paragraphs C2IB, C23, and C25 of this section, when a significant change in account terms is described in paragraph C2, Roman numeral 2, of this section is made, a creditor must provide a written notice of the change at least 45 days prior to the effective date of the change to each consumer who may be affected. The 45-day timing requirement does not apply if the consumer has agreed to a particular change as described in paragraph C2, Roman numeral IB of this section. For such changes, notice must be given in accordance with the time requirements of that same section of this section. Increases in the rate applicable to the consumer's account due to delinquency, default, or as a penalty described in paragraph G of this section that are not due to a change in the contractual terms of the consumer's account must be disclosed pursuant to paragraph G of this section instead of paragraph C2. Right now I'm reading B. To Roman numeral 1B, which was being referenced in this paragraph. Changes agreed to by the consumer is the title of B. A notice of change in terms is required, but it may be mailed or delivered as late as the effective date of the change if the consumer agrees to this particular change. This paragraph C2IB applies only when the consumer substitutes collateral or when the creditor can advance additional credit only if a change relatively unique to that consumer is made, such as the consumer is providing additional security or paying an increased minimum payment amount. The following are not considered payments between the consumer and the creditor for purposes of this paragraph. C2IB, the consumer's general acceptance of the creditor's contract or reservation of the right to change terms, the consumer's use of the account which may imply acceptance of its terms under state law, the consumer's acceptance of a unilateral term change that is not particular to that consumer, but rather is of general applicability to consumers with that type of account, and the consumer's request to reopen a closed account or to upgrade an existing account to another account offered by the creditor with different credit or other features. 2. Roman numeral 2, significant changes in account terms. For purposes of this section, a significant change in account terms means a change to a term required to be disclosed under 1026.2b1 and B2. An increase in the required minimum periodic payment, a change to the term required to be disclosed under 1026.6b4, or the acquisition of a security interest. Roman numeral 3, changes not covered by B1 or B2 except as provided in paragraph C2.4 of this section. If a creditor increases any component of a charge or introduces a new charge required to be disclosed under 1026.6b3, that is not a significant change in the account terms described in paragraph C2.2 of this section. A creditor must either at its option A or B, comply with the requirements under paragraph C2I of this section, or B, provide notice of the amount of the charge before the consumer agrees to or becomes obligated to pay the charge at the time and in a manner the consumer would be likely to notice the disclosure of the charge. The notice may be provided orally or in writing. Roman numeral 4, disclosure requirements. A, significant changes in account terms. If a creditor makes a significant change to account terms as described in paragraph C2.2 of this section, the notice provided pursuant to that paragraph of this section must provide the following information: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is displayed on this page. 1 being a summary of the changes made to the terms required by B1, 1026.B6, B1, and B2, or 1026.6B4, a description of any increase in the required minimum periodic payment and a description of any security interest being acquired by the creditor. 2, a statement that changes are being made to the account. 3, for accounts other than credit card accounts under an open-end non-home secured consumer credit plan subject to 1026.9C24B, a statement indicating the consumer has a right to opt out of these changes if applicable. Any reference to additional information describing the opt-out right provided in the notice if applicable. 4, the date the changes will become effective. 5, if applicable, a statement that the consumer may find additional information about the summarized changes and other changes to the account in the notice. 6, if the creditor is changing a rate on the account other than a penalty rate, a statement that if the penalty rate currently applies to the consumer's account, the new rate described in the notice will not apply to the consumer's account until the consumer's account balances are no longer subject to the penalty rate. 7, if the change in terms being disclosed is an increase in the annual percentage rate, the balances to which the increased rate will be applied. If applicable, a statement identifying balances to which the current rate will continue to apply as of the effective date of the change in terms. And 8, if the change in terms being disclosed is an increase in an APR for a credit card account under an open-end non-home secured consumer credit plan, a statement of no more than 4 principal reasons for the rate increase listed in their order of importance. B, right to reject for credit card accounts under an open-end non-home secured consumer credit plan. In addition to the disclosures in paragraph C24A of this section, if a card issuer makes a significant change to account terms on a credit card account under an open-end non-home secured consumer credit plan, the creditor must generally provide the following information on the notice provided pursuant to paragraph C2I of this section. This information is not required to be provided in the case of an increase in the required minimum periodic payment, an increase in a fee as a result of a reevaluation of a determination made under 1026.52B1 Roman numeral I, or an adjustment to the safe harbors in 1026.52B1 Roman numeral II to an increase in a fee previously reduced consistent with U.S. Code or a similar federal or state statute or regulation if the amount of the increased fee does not exceed the amount of the fee prior to reduction, or when the change results from the creditor not receiving the consumer's required minimum periodic payment within 60 days after the due date of the payment. 1, 2, and 3. 1. A statement that the consumer has the right to reject the change or changes prior to the effective date of the change is unless the consumer fails to make a required minimum periodic payment within 60 days after the due date for that payment. 2. Instructions for rejecting the change or changes and a toll-free telephone number and that the consumer may use to notify the creditor of the rejection. And 3, if applicable, a statement that if the consumer rejects a change or changes, the consumer's ability to use the account for further advances will be terminated or suspended. C. Changes resulting from the failure to make minimum periodic payment within 60 days from due date or credit card accounts under an open-end non-home secured consumer credit plan. For a credit card account under an open-end non-home secured consumer credit plan, 1. The significant change required to be disclosed pursuant to paragraph C2I of the section is an increase in an APR or a fee or change required to be disclosed under 1026.6B2, B23, or B212 based on the consumer's failure to make minimum periodic payment within 60 days of the due date for that payment. The notice provided pursuant to paragraph C2I of the section must state that the increase will cease to apply to transactions that occurred prior to or within 14 days of provision of the notice if the creditor receives 6 consecutive required minimum periodic payments on or before the payment due date, beginning on the first payment due following the effective date of the increase. 2. If the significant change required to be disclosed pursuant to paragraph C2I of the section is an increase in a fee or charge required to be disclosed under 1026 6B2, Roman numeral 2, Roman numeral 3, or Roman numeral 12, based on the consumer's failure to make a minimum periodic payment within 60 days of the due date for that payment, the notice provided pursuant to paragraph C2I of the section must also state the reasons for the increase. D, format requirements. Tabular format is number 1. Number 2 is notice included with periodic statement. And number 3 is notice provided separately from periodic statement. Excuse me. Tabular format. A summary of changes described in paragraph C2 for A1 of this section must be in tabular format except for the summary of any increase in the required minimum periodic payment. A summary of the term required to be disclosed under 1026.6b4 that is not required to be disclosed under 1026.6b1 and b2, or a description of any security interest being acquired by the creditor. With headings and format substantially similar to any of the account opening disclosures found in G17 and Appendix G to this part, the table must disclose the changed term and information relevant to the change. If that relevant information is required by 1026.6b1 and b2, the new term shall be described in the same level of detail as required when disclosing the terms under 1026.6b2. Notice included with periodic statement. If a notice required by paragraph C2I of this section is included on or with a periodic statement, the information described in paragraph C2 for A1 of the section must be disclosed on the front of any page of the statement. The summary of changes described in paragraph C2 for A1 of the section must immediately follow the information described in paragraph C2 for A2 through 7, and if applicable, paragraphs 8, C2 for B and C2 for C of the section, and be substantially similar to the format shown in sample G20 or G21 in Appendix G of this part. 3. Notice provided separately from periodic statement. If a notice required by paragraph C21 of this section is not included on or with a periodic statement, the information described in paragraph C2 Roman numeral 4A1 of this section must, at the creditor's option, be disclosed on the front of the first page of the notice or segregated on a separate piece of paper. The information given with the notice. The summary of changes required to be in a table pursuant to paragraphs C2 for A1 of this section may be on more than one page and may use both the front and reverse side so long as the table begins on the front of the first page of the notice and there is a reference on the first page indicating the table continues on the following page. A summary of changes described in that paragraph of the section must immediately follow the information described in paragraphs 2 through 7, and if applicable, paragraphs 8, 4b, 4c of this section, substantially similar to the format shown in G20 or G21 in Appendix G to this part. Notice not required is Roman numeral 5. For open-end plans other than home equity plans subject to the requirements of 1026.40, a creditor is not required to provide a notice under this section A or B. A, when the change involves charges for documentary evidence, a reduction of any component of a finance or other charge, suspension of future credit privileges, except as provided in paragraph C2.4 of this section, or termination of an account or plan when the change results from an agreement involving a court proceeding and when the change is an extension of the grace period, or if the change is applicable only to checks that access credit card accounts and the change terms are disclosed on or with the checks in accordance with paragraph B3 of this section. B, when the change is an increase in an APR or fee upon the expiration of a specified period of time, provided that 1, prior to the commencement of that period, the creditor disclosed in writing to the consumer in a clear and conspicuous manner the length of the period and the APR or fee that would apply after expiration of the period. 2, the disclosure of the length of the period and the APR or fee that would apply after expiration of the period are set forth in close proximity and equal prominence to the first listing of the disclosure of the rate or fee that applies during a specified period of time. And 3, the annual percentage rate or fee that applies after that period does not exceed the rate or fee disclosed pursuant to paragraph C2 Roman numeral 5 B1 of this section, or if the rate disclosed pursuant to that paragraph of this section was a variable rate. The rate following such increase is a variable rate determined by the same formula, index, and margin that was used to calculate the variable rate disclosed pursuant to that paragraph. C, when a change is an increase in a variable APR in accordance with the credit card or account agreement that provides for changes in rate according to operation of an index that is not under the control of the creditor and available to the general public. Or D, when the change is an increase in an annual percentage rate, a fee, or change charge required to be disclosed under 1026.6 B2 Roman numeral 2, 3, 8, 9, and 12 of the required minimum periodic payment due to the completion of a workout or temporary hardship arrangement by the consumer is failure to comply with the terms of such agreement, provided that 1, the APR or fee or charge applicable to the applicable category of transactions or the required minimum periodic payment following any such increase does not exceed the rate or fee or charge or required minimum periodic payment that applied to the category of transactions prior to commencement of the arrangement, or if the rate that applied to a category of transactions prior to the commencement of the workout or temporary hardship agreement was a variable rate, the rate following any such increase is a variable rate determined by the same formula, rate or margin, that applied to the category of transactions prior to the commencement of the workout or temporary hardship arrangement. And 2, the creditor has provided the consumer prior to the commencement of such arrangement with a clear and conspicuous disclosure of the terms of the arrangement, including the increase due to such completion or failure. This disclosure must generally be provided in writing. However, a creditor may provide the disclosure of the terms of the arrangement orally by telephone, provided that the creditor mails or delivers a written disclosure of the terms of the arrangement to the consumer as soon as reasonably practicable after the oral disclosure is provided. Roman numeral 6, reduction of the credit limit.